Okay, hi guys. Today in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to finish up our conversation about invertebrates. All right, and again, of course, remember invertebrates are your animals without a backbone. In the previous 4 videos, we had talked about what invertebrates are. We talked about the first 2 phylums of invertebrates, which is Porifera and Cnidaria. Then we looked at our 3 phylums of worms, and then we talked about arthropods. And arthropods, if you remember, is the largest group of animals in the animal kingdom. Arthropods compose 80% of the animals that you find in the animal kingdom. All right, today we're going to wrap up our discussion of invertebrates, and we're going to look at the last 2 phylums of invertebrate animals. And the first of those 2 phylums that we're going to look at today is actually the second largest phylum of animals in the animal kingdom. And again, a lot of times these are animals that you would not necessarily recognize as being animals. But again, I'm going to reinforce this one more time. To be an animal, basically it means that it's a multicellular organism with eukaryotic cells that do not have cell walls. And so therefore, that's how these animals are also considered animals in the animal kingdom. Okay, the first of the last 2 phylums of invertebrates that we're going to look at is phylum Mollusca. All right, and phylum Mollusca is actually composed of, you can see the various different types of animals that you have there. You have squids, you have octopuses, snails, slugs, clams, oysters, mussels, those types of organisms. All right, and those are all considered mollusks. Now, clams, oysters, scallops, and mussels belong to class bivalve, okay? And that simply means that they have 2 shells that are hinged together, okay? Then you have the squids and the octopuses, which are the cephalopods, and then you have your snails and slugs, which are considered gastropods, all right? Now, what does it mean to be a mollusk, okay? Well, mollusks, again, very diverse group of animals. All right, and as I said to you before, this is the second largest animal phyla in the animal kingdom. All right, mollusks are marine, meaning they live in salt water, some are freshwater, and some are terrestrial, meaning that they live on land. Okay, the majority of these animals do have a shell, a very hard exoskeleton that protects the body and allows for muscle attachment. There are a few that do not have a shell per se, specifically like slugs and octopuses, but they still have a protective layer, all right, around them. These animals all have very soft bodies, henceforth the reason why the majority of them have a shell, all right, which protects their body. These animals do have complete organs and organ systems, and in fact, these were the first animals to develop specific excretory organs, organs that excretes wastes from their body. Okay, so even though the previous phylums of animals that we had talked about, the invertebrates, that they did excrete wastes, the mollusks were the first group of animals to develop complete excretory organ system. All right, they are coelomates. They do have a coelom. All right, and they reproduce sexually. Okay, there are separate sexes, so there are female and males. All right, and they can reproduce via internal fertilization or external fertilization. Remember, internal fertilization involves the male depositing sperm inside the female in which to fertilize the eggs. And then external fertilization is when the females lay the eggs and then the males come and spray the sperm on the eggs, and so the fertilization of the eggs takes place outside of the female's body. Whether they reproduce with internal fertilization or external fertilization depends upon the species of mollusk that you're looking at. Okay, and these organisms also have an open circulatory system, which means that their blood is not confined in a system of vessels such as we have. We have what is called a closed circulatory system, but they have an open circulatory system, kind of like the arthropods that we talked about last week. the blood flows freely through the inside of the body and basically just keeps everything wet. All right, now, mollusks are known for their special body structures, okay, and this is what makes them mollusks. And even though mollusks is a very diverse group of organisms, as you saw from the first slide, where you have clams, oysters, scallops, mussels, squid, octopus, snails, and slugs, they all do possess these special body structures, and that's what makes them classified together as mollusks. Okay, the first special body structure that they have is something that's called the mantle, and that's a thin tissue layer that lines the inside of the shell. And the cells of the mantle actually secrete the material that will harden into the shell on the outside of the body. So it kind of makes sense that this thin tissue layer is lining the inside of the shell, all right, because that's what produces the shell. All right. Mollusks have a large muscular structure that they use for movement, burrowing, and capturing prey, and that's actually called a foot. Now, you might be thinking that, like the bivalves, clams, oysters, scallops, mussels, do they have this foot? And the answer is yes, they do. If you've ever walked along the beach and you've seen, baby clams and such, as they wash up onto the beach from the water, you may actually see them that they open up their shell a little bit and you see a structure come out from that shell. And that's what they use to dig into the sand, because that's where they grow, usually is buried in the sand, depending upon the species. And so that actually is the foot. Okay, the foot actually secretes mucus to help these organisms glide along, specifically when you're thinking about a snail or even a slug. I don't know if you've ever seen a snail or a slug move, but as they move, they leave behind this mucus layer behind them, and that's because the foot, their foot will secrete this mucus to help it glide along. Okay, now, they have the excretory organs, okay, which I said this was the first group of animals to develop a complete excretory system, all right, and that's called the nephridia, all right, and this is a system of small tubes which collects wastes from body fluids and then will excrete them to outside the body. All right, they also have what is called a radula, which is it's a hard tooth-like structure that's inside their mouth, and that they use that to scrape food from surfaces. And octopuses and squids actually also have this radula. All right, it almost kind of forms like a beak, all right, for them. All right, but that's called, it's called the radula, and it is a tooth-like structure. And then they have what's called a visceral mass, which is a pocket inside the shell, for the most part, that contains the internal organs, okay? Now, again, all mollusks, regardless of how different they look, have these body structures, and that's what makes them all classified together as mollusks, all right? And for an example, here is what the inside of a snail body would look like, or inside the shell. All right, you can see the shell is that orange line there on the top of this body, and you can see the soft body underneath. But notice how the body is attached to the shell and the organs are actually attached to the shell. All right, but you can see there the mouth, the radula, they do have an esophagus, a stomach, they have an intestinal tract, and of course they have the anus, all right, in which to excrete wastes. You can see the nerve cords, all right, they do have gills. Those especially that are aquatic, not necessarily the terrestrial varieties, but the aquatic ones do have a gill, and it kind of looks like the leaf there. All right, you can see the nephridium, all right, which is more the other excretory organs. You can see the coelom, all right, the heart, the mantle, all right, the visceral mass, which is, the big opening at the pocket that contains all the internal organs. All right, so that is basically what the internal structure of a mollusk looks like. And again, this is a snail body, so this gives you an example by looking at the snail. But if you think about it, clams, oysters, mussels, all right, those are soft-bodied organisms that live within those two-shelled hinge shells, okay, and all of this is inside of that soft body as well. So if you eat clams and you eat oysters and that kind of thing, which I love clams, you're eating all of this when you consume the body of the clam. Now, I don't want you to stop eating them if you eat them, because they are very tasty. All right. However, just keep in mind that when you're consuming that clam, you're consuming all of this that you see right there, all of the internal organs and everything. All right. Now, the last phylum of invertebrates that we're going to be looking at, all right, or that there is phylum Echinodermata. And phylum Echinodermata is the phylum that includes starfish, sand dollars, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers. And you can see pictures of all of these there. On the top, there you have what's called the sea cucumber and the sand dollar. And on the bottom there to the left, you have the starfish. And then to the right, you have what's called the sea urchin. All right, now these are animals. All right, and, but again, what makes them an animal is the fact that they're multicellular, eukaryotic cells without a cell wall. All right, now what makes an echinoderm an echinoderm? All right, well, they have spiny skin, as you can see from those pictures that were on the last slide. Okay, these are coelomates, so they do have a fluid-filled body cavity. All right. These guys exhibit radial symmetry. We didn't really talk symmetry with the mollusks, all right, and that's because some of it would be bilateral, some of it would be radial. It depends on the species, okay? But now what makes these guys interesting is the fact that they have something called a water vascular system, which is fluid-filled tubes that function in movement, feeding, and respiration. Now, I did put links for videos from YouTube for mollusks and for echinoderms, and you're going to see when you're watching those videos how this water vascular system works, and it's really pretty neat. Okay, the water vascular system opens to the outside of the body through what is called a hematoporite, which is a sieve-like structure on the top of the bodies, and you're going to see that when I show you the basic structure of an echinoderm. All right, now the other thing that they have, which is kind of neat, is they have these things called tube feet, which are suction discs on the underside of their bodies used for movement. And literally, as they are moving across, like, say, the ocean floor, these are all aquatic marine animals. All right, as they're moving across the ocean floor, these feet move like feet. However, they're like little suction discs. And again, you're going to see that in the video that I have linked for YouTube. Okay, now the tube feet and the water vascular system work together, all right, for movement, okay, for feeding and all that kind of good stuff. Now, the echinoderms do not have a head or a brain, all right. They do have an endoskeleton, which is an internal skeleton, where we talked about with arthropods and mollusks. They have an exoskeleton, which is a shell. It's a skeleton on the outside of the body. These guys do have an endoskeleton. In fact, they're the first group of animals we've talked about that have an endoskeleton, and that's a skeleton on the inside of the body. We as humans have an endoskeleton, a skeleton on the inside of our body. However, it's called the radial canal here with echinoderms, all right? Now, they actually have a very complex life cycle. It's a two-stage life cycle that they have. Okay, the first stage is called a bipinnaria, which is a larval stage, and it is a free swimming stage. And then the adult stage is a five-pointed star, okay? And it's a five-part body plan, and the parts radiate out from the center, all right, of their bodies. And specifically, when we look at this, we want to look at the starfish, okay? If you think of the starfish, all right, even though not all of them are starfish, you have the sea cucumbers, you have the sand dollars, and you have the sea urchins, okay, they do have this five-part body plan, all right, like a five-pointed star. Now, echinoderms reproduce both asexually and sexually. All right, asexually, these guys can reproduce through regeneration. All right, it's really kind of neat. If you take a starfish and you cut an arm off of a starfish, all right, the arm that you've cut off will grow back the other four arms and the middle portion of the body. And the starfish that you cut the arm off of will grow back that arm that it's missing. All right, so they do have this ability to regenerate. But they also reproduce sexually with the egg and the sperm released into the water. Okay, the females will release the eggs, the males will release the sperm. They will fertilize in the water. All right, so that is through external fertilization. All right. Now, here's an example of what an echinoderm's body looks like. All right, and this, of course, is a starfish, which the starfish, of course, is going to be the one that's most recognizable as far as being an echinoderm. But you can see in there the radial canal. You can see the tube feet. All right, you can see that there's a central ring there. All right, and that radial canal, there's the central ring, and then it extends out into each of the 5 arms, and that would be considered the endoskeleton. It fills up with water, and it's very rigid, and it provides shape, and it protects, and it helps in movement and feeding and all that kind of neat stuff. All right, you can see at the top there that they do have this metaporite, all right, which I said is a sieve-like structure that helps filter, water out through the body. All right, the anus is actually on top of the body, and their mouth is underneath. All right, so when these organisms are feeding, all right, and they are carnivores, they will eat other animals. All right, they actually, what they do is they use their tube feet, and they literally climb on top of whatever it is that they're going to eat, and the mouth is on the bottom, and they will bring the pieces of whatever it is that they're eating inside their mouth, and they do digest it. You can see that they do have a stomach, all right, and then the waste products, of course, come out through the anus, all right. Now, again, I have provided links for you guys for really neat videos on mollusks and echinoderms from YouTube, so I'm going to ask you to please make sure you watch those videos so you can see how all of this works together, all right. And that, guys and gals, wraps up our study of invertebrates. In our next video, we're going to start discussing vertebrates and characteristics of the vertebrates, which hopefully you would know will be animals with backbones. All right? And that's all for today. Have a great day.